I would like to welcome Dr. Andrew McDowell to the podium.
Certainly no need to clap for I should probably leave this where it is because it's not, we want to.
The blue thing is.
Well, I'll leave this too, but the mic, I won't bring it up to my gigantic level. So welcome everyone, hi. It's lovely to see you all. It's such a beautiful opportunity to see a room full of scholars and young scholars here at Tulane. I'm so pleased to welcome you. I've been asked to introduce Arjun Appadurai succinctly, which is no mean feat. Professor Appadurai has held appointments in some of the country's leading and most influential universities, Penn, Chicago, Yale, and NYU, where he held important instructional and administrative roles. Humanities Dean, Director of the Center of Cities and Globalization, and Provost in the final three, respectively. Currently, he's Professor Emeritus of Media, Culture, and Communication, at NYU. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, and has held numerous and continues to hold numerous very prestigious fellowships. Professor Appadurai's work has initiated several sea changes within anthropology, my own discipline. And so by way of introduction, I'd like to share just two of these ways that I think he's shaped our field. First, contemporary anthropologists now take Appadurai's insights and conceptual languages to study globalization as almost for granted. To my mind, this speaks to his important role in shifting the discipline away from thinking about human societies or cultures as discrete, self-contained units that could be read as whole texts or studied from a holistic, place-based method. His language to understand how people, ideas, finances, technologies, and medias move in flows to shape spaces and experiences of difference and similitude has opened new opportunities to think about how people craft their world and the world through objects and imaginaries of the socially possible. His work has created a discipline that now sees globalization and mobility as powerful forces in the world's most out-of-the-way places, and might see a port as a locus of social life, just perhaps. Second, Professor Appadurai's work to create what we now call community-engaged scholarship has paved the way for more collaborative methods and participatory research in the discipline. His work with PUCAR, which I always have to look and make sure I get the English right, Partners for Urban Knowledge, Action, and Research, or for those of us who speak South Asian languages, often means to call out, which I think is an important piece of that story, has inspired anthropologists to think about the conduct of research as a revolutionary and rights-asserting act. Under Appadurai's guidance, PUCAR scholars have created important research about health, income, and residential inequality. Appadurai's own work on urban social movements, economies, and governmentality has shown the entire field how action and partnership might enliven and enrich social analyses. Again, a forefront of this thing we think of as almost part and parcel of our field now. So these are, to my mind, two really central things that Professor Appadurai has brought to us. Professor Appadurai's publications have also guided much of my own thinking over the years. Here are a few which immediately come to mind. Articles, The Past as Scarce Resource, and How to Make a National Cuisine help me think about nationalism. Books, Modernity at Large, and The Social Life of Things outline a method and conceptual language for ethnographically imagining globalization. And long essays, you can tell us which you think they are. Fear of Small Numbers and Banking on Words help consider the interconnections between economics and affects. They create keywords for a conversation around ports as places where regimes of value are negotiated. Indeed, Appadurai's work has argued for an attention to the power of social imaginaries and how they're shaped by material and relational life and shape them in return. This makes him a leader in the field. There are a great many other points one might consider, co-founder of Public Culture among them, but the fact of the matter is that no matter what I say, I will feel as if I have failed to convey the depth and breadth of this scholar's impact both on the field and the university at large. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming him and join in what I imagine will be a very fruitful conversation about circulation and comparison and global socio-cultural flows. Thank you very much, Professor Appadurai. So I'll be back.
Just one moment to make sure I get my pages ready. Well, I'm of course deeply honored to be here, and like some of the others earlier, I have to say some words of thanks. They will necessarily not be exhaustive, but indicative. So please forgive me if there are either some names or parts of Tulane that I don't mention in this brief word of thanks, but I have to begin by thanking the provost who graced this important event and said some very insightful and humorous things as a way of showing his investment in this enterprise, and in the dean, in Brian, who is, I won't say single-handedly, but definitely with some of his hands, responsible for my presence here. And we have had a long friendship and set of exchanges on all kinds of subjects over a long period of time, but which came active in recent months and years, partly in Berlin. And Brian is such an intrepid traveler that therefore I was able to see him more or less a block from my house, which is about my navigating distance these days. So it was a wonderful spark, which then led us to talk about this project, related publications, the initiative here, and Tulane as a whole, the School of Liberal Arts and the broader environment. And of course, like many people, I've been to New Orleans, but very briefly, and not with any deep exposure to its intellectual life. So as an academic, a lifer, so to speak, I'm very glad to be here to see this university, and of course its ecology, which is remarkable. So I'm grateful to also all the people who have worked on parts of this event, many of whom I've only met in the last few days, and who, like Tori, have made sure that I just don't wander off into some unknown edge horizon, never to be seen again. So luckily, I'm therefore able to recur as you wish. So I'm thankful to all of them, because I know behind each of them is another army of thoughtful people. Joseph has certainly had me, as I said, as the 81st use of his lighter. This goes to Our Man Flint, a very old film, where the star said, you know, I have a lighter, and its 81st use is to light cigarettes. The first 80 are other things, like take care of this and that, the other. So Joe has been it. Others have too. So I'll just say I'm really honored, and I thank each and all of you for making the time to join this collective venture into which I'm very happy to be inserted. So you also have been kind enough to make time for me, and I'm very appreciative of that. So I'm going to launch in, and I will be mindful of the clock, and maybe, Joe, you'll be kind enough when I'm getting to, say, 5 minutes before my time is up, and I can, like an accordion, you know, but I need a little indication. I've planned the paper accordingly. I've cut about 70 or 80 pages. No, I've inflated it shamelessly. It was only 5 pages or so, and I added this and that. No. So my starting point on which I have written elsewhere, and the idea of written elsewhere could be repeated many times, as many of you will see. There's a lot of déjà vu here. But since I'm still standing, and since more or less I still see what's going on in the world, there will be little twists. So the test here is, in the midst of this feast of iteration, there are little moments of something new, and can you catch them? So this is the kind of cognitive test, if I may use that term, which has become strangely urgent these days. There are a few new things, but they are embedded in an aspect of things produced over my longish career. So I've developed over time, the idea that it is history that produces geography and not vice versa. I developed this aphorism some years ago as part of an effort to reconcile the tradition of area studies in which I was trained with the epistemological challenges posed to area studies by globalization. It is hard to imagine, but there was a very hot issue when I was a young faculty member. Was, should we do this or should we do that? Can we do both? Should we do either? Etc. It's all a little resolved now, but I think the issues are still quite real. Areas seemed fixed forever. Globalization was all about new interactions and constant change. Could the two ideas work together? This conundrum led me and many others to see that we need to get away from one of our stronger human tendencies, which is to see space as a stage and time as the arrow that moves across it. In other words, we tend to see geographical space as somehow natural, probably because of its associations with soil, land, and nature, and time as somehow more cultural. Thus, the geographical concept of areas or regions or countries or even of, dare I say it, port cities or cities tends to remain naturalized. Land and water, for example, is always there when you think port cities. In spite of the path-breaking work of thinkers like the great Henri Lefebvre, who showed brilliantly how space is produced by the circumstances of technology, labor, and exchange, we still tend to think of the physical and material properties of various spaces as being essential, inherent, and relatively fixed. And as such, we think of geographical realities as shaping or even determining the forces of time, change, and history. So someone like the recently revived Huntington, who I thought was addressed already, or had an address, is back. And of course, his idea was a prime example of, you look at the map, you see the spaces, there are civilizations, they are clashing, etc. I think still a deeply flawed idea, but one has to restate the flaws, every 10 years or so. So this mistaken idea shows up in many versions, such as the Huntingtonian one. All approaches that naturalize regions and present civilizations as geographical and racial blocks. And anybody who studies any fluid place like this city, as I learned yesterday in a lovely meeting with my colleagues in the anthropology department, I already learned a lot of things about the intense historically produced quality of this city. Of course, I know this somehow in principle, but to get the actual reasoning for why that is vital was very enriching to me. So if we reverse this thinking and look at histories as producing geographies, we can get a better sense of what we have learned in the humanities, the social sciences, even the natural sciences, about how regions, areas, and even civilizations, they emerge. They emerge through the work of human beings, including through what I called, again, somewhat long ago, the work of the imagination. As these human beings work to extend their chances of survival, improve their horizons of possibility, and enhance their wealth and security. These activities, which are by no means strictly and exclusively the product of modernity, have characterized throughout human history what, again, way back sometime, I call the production of locality. So local is not a background against which other things happen. It is actively, daily, laboriously produced. This is worth constantly saying. I say to myself all the time because it illuminates particular things. Why are people doing X? Why? The whole question of custom. I mean, what is custom? Custom is kind of habitual repetition, but does it mean you just put in a little thing into your head and the custom department and you start moving? No, it's assiduous, repeated, creative labor which then accretes into something that looks static. But why does it achieve that status? That is a big and important question. So included in this, as human beings exercise their social, technical, and imaginative capacities, They literally, including the capacity, lest this be seen as a kind of romantic picture, for violence, warfare, and ecological selfishness, they literally produce their geographies. So the production of locality is also the production of geography. That is, they produce the environments within which they function, including the biological and physical nature of these environments. And this is a small gesture to what I wish were something I knew more about and didn't come to so late in my own career, which is climate. Climate, the Anthropocene crisis. It is a late thing in my life, it's a late thing in my career, so I recognize it, but it's not hardwired into my thinking. And I really think, I had an exchange with your colleague, Brent, Shelley Pollack, who's big into the climate movement, and he said, when you go to Tulane, I told him what I'm doing, he said, please tell him that almost the whole list is going down. And he gave me examples from New York, from here, from there, meaning the crisis is about to make, he was putting it in an extreme way, that port cities will vanish unless something remarkable happens. So that should be a theme, but I'm pretty useless on that topic, except as a bystander. But I'm very sympathetic, and I think everything we say ought to have that. And that began in the discussion this afternoon, and I hope it will recur, not to become the kind of dark shroud under which the conference dies a premature death, but to say we are aware that it's not all good news, and it's overall somewhat bad news, but then we have to take the logic of necessity and somehow push it towards the logic of possibility, of alternatives. That's what we always do, and we have to do it again. So I just mentioned that in the side. So the civilizational ideas have geographies produced regions, and that means human movement and human traffic. Merchants, traders, rulers have produced these geographies, and that is true, therefore, and we saw this already today in the various presentations, port cities, surely, if ever there were phenomena that were produced by historical actors, not in isolation, not heroic agents and so on, but people going somewhere, doing something, conquering, trading, exchanging, somewhere they produce also port cities. And the question, how does that help us? That idea is very important. So the variety of merchants, pilgrims, peasants, priests, to think of older types of connectors, who created the maps, the roads, the temples, the texts, and the languages which form the elements of these regions, which we now identify with a single major nation. And this history has had a certain amount of excellent work done on it, but I think more can be done to show how historical actors in action have crystallized, sedimented, catalyzed these things that now appear as geographical realities into which we have to reinforce life and agencies. We have to resuscitate them, bang, bang, stand aside, boom, but we put them to sleep in the first place by our convention, so I think we should bear that in mind. So it is very straightforward that what is true of nations, as somebody, people in my tradition have tried to say for a long time, is surely true of port cities as products of human interactions and intentions, raising a whole host of questions about comparison, similarity, ideal typicality, and all that already came up in this afternoon, very rightly so. So we know this literature about nations. It's been worked over and over again, yet it remains remarkable to me, sort of 30, 40 years into reading Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities and peddling my own retail versions here and there, it is still kind of uphill. If I ask you the question, why are people ready to kill or die for this plainly artificial, recent, arbitrary, and extractive form? And why isn't the universal form? If you're not a nation, you're not the United Nations, you don't belong, you don't have a voice. I mean, when did this happen? And I now know, after dint of reading every headline in the world, that many of these nations are incredibly young. Switzerland, for example, was a pocket full of puzzle pieces, and suddenly it's Switzerland. But I take only that one example among any number. They all quickly can unpack into very recent, very arbitrary, very artificial, where everybody underneath that level of organization has to be hammered into becoming Frenchmen, Indians, Pakistanis. Say it where you like. I have still to see the exception of it. Even the tough cases like Japan. And we have at least one distinguished Japanese colleague, I don't know where he is here. There you are, who may well pause over this, but even there, I mean, what about Okinawa? What about here? What about there? What about the Koreans in Japan? Slowly everything is leaking, even in a place where empirically there is a long history of relative homogeneity, relative closure to the outside, but relative is a key word. Relative, and it's hard work to keep that going. Ask any Japanese administrator or diplomat, how easy is it to keep Nihon alive in every way? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So I won't say much more about that, but sitting here in New Orleans, with scholars working, as we saw today already, on port cities like Mumbai, Shanghai, Tangier, Barcelona, and Hong Kong, among a host of others, who can doubt the man-made nature of these cities, their lack of any special natural logic, their debt to the work of the crane and the bulldozer? Indeed, I lived once in a part of Manhattan where there was a tremendous boom in new tall buildings. This was in the early 2000s, Vijayant Sethi will remember this, with an explosive market in rentals and condominium apartments for the upper classes. Having made a quick and my only trip to mainland China, roughly around that time, Shanghai and Beijing, that's the full total of my physical exposure to China, I often called this part of Manhattan Little Beijing. This small part was like Beijing because when I visited Beijing at that time, I was stunned by the skyline of cranes, by the vast amount of new construction, by the infinite expansion of the city, upwards, as Vijay said, and outwards. And it was on a scale that made Manhattan seem like a small, wayside shop, because it was vast, as all things in China tend to be. So Manhattan was having this kind of gentrification boom on a smaller scale in the 2010s and somewhat before that and after. But the relevant fact is that cities are surely instances in which history makes geography. And even in this context, there is still a prejudice that great cities were destined to emerge in their locations and was simply waiting to happen, although we all point to contingency on a daily basis. But when the crunch comes, our city had to be there. At least I think that way. But the great, this is a book promo, the great thinker who settled my thinking on this matter, that there's some natural reason why New Orleans became a port, why Mumbai became this, why that one became that, settled it once and for all, is the great environmental historian William Cronon, in a brilliant study called Nature's Metropolis. Quite ancient, but well worth going to Amazon or some other book dealer somewhere. Please buy it. Showing exactly how chance, human effort, and outright opposition to the logics of physical geography are what made Chicago a major city and a key to the agrarian wealth of the Western United States for Eastern money. So that's a big job. But there were contenders. There was St. Louis, there was this one, they were all in the game, and they were better placed. They were the railroads. And then this little place at the end of the river, horrible weather, terrible ecology, but a bunch of very smart boosters and I came out, suddenly it's Chicago. And of course, in 30 years or so, it always had to be Chicago. What happened to St. Louis, to Topeka, to this one, to that one? They all had stuff to be the window to Western agrarian wealth. So Chicago is a great story. It need never have happened. And it so happened that it now appears absolutely necessary. It's a cardinal case of keeping the door open to the play of contingency, even in retrospect, saying it need not have happened. Though once it happened, it appears like, where was the choice? Well, there was a very clear set of choices at the time. So this may be true in all these cases, but I want to now shift briefly, having said something about history, geography, and the role of human agency in producing what look like these default geographies that are already there, against which we do history as humans. I want to talk, which I have, again, these are things I've written about here and there, but I keep returning to them. Traffic jams and blocks. Because after my early work in this area, I was told repeatedly and enthusiastically that I seemed to be a childish enthusiast of global flows. I was asked repeatedly, but aren't there passports? Aren't there blocks? I thought, oh yeah, I guess I have a passport myself. Anyway, I don't want to make a joke of it, but yes, I was aware that the world was not simply flowing in every direction. But I did say that was important because there was another point of view before that. So this is a standard Kuhnian process. Everything is frozen in one direction, so you have to defrost it a little bit. The minute you start the defrosting, it's like, but you've forgotten there are blocks, there are obstacles, not everybody can travel, not everybody is wealthy. Okay. So I'm an obedient respondent to criticism, so I took it on board and I said, okay, let's think about the blocks. So even with port cities, it's worth asking, there are flows, but where are the blocks? Who's stopping? And I think Vajayanti's point today was very instructive to me that in Bombay, where you have this very energetic port city, you have the movement to make it Mumbai by a set of people who are committed to regional chauvinism, which then feeds into national chauvinism, that is Marathi speakers, one language, nothing multilingualistic about these guys. They see it, but they don't like it. So they represent something it now struck me as worth exploring, which is if you're on the edge, even if you change the term, maybe we should have the idea of something like a fold, not an edge, because every time there's a push out, let's say to the sea, somebody is sitting there pulling back to the land, saying, this is Maharashtra, this is Bombay, this is our neighborhood, this is our place. And that sometimes becomes, what do you call it? It's on steroids. But everywhere you have a push out through an edge into the ocean, and you will get another set of people pulling, saying, no, this is our city, it's our region, it's our language. So I think that's very well worth asking about, especially in port cities, but it's a general issue of blockages or resistances to processes of flow. So just a few questions in my mind, for example. Why are there not more students from other Chinese-speaking societies at the great design schools in Beijing and Shanghai? They've been there for 15 years, 20 years, huge. But where are the people from the rest of the Sino world? They're all from the mainland, by and large, so far as I know. Why not more students from China and Japan at the Indian Film Institute in Pune? Everybody likes Indian films. There are even one or two good Indian filmmakers, actually many, hundreds. But the answers are many, but the question is there. Why? We all want international students, but why can't the Indian Film Institute get some Asian students who also love cinema to come? Don't know, interesting. Why not more Chinese engineering students at the Indian IIT, which are very good, and are sending people straight to Silicon Valley where they make billions and come back to India. So they're not the B team, they're the A team. And even if the Chinese have remarkable science capacities, they could pick up a thing or two from here and there, but they don't. Lest you think this is somehow a critique of China or other parts of Asia, Indians are the worst. They won't, go anywhere where there are options unless they are driven to it. So you'll see Indians going to med school in Ukraine. It's not because they're tourists thinking it's a nice, safe place. It's because Indian medical schools are very tough to get. So when the pressure is brutal, people will respond and go here and there. But why not more incentive-based, positive traffic? Or consider the popular film industries of Hong Kong and Mumbai, two mega industries, as almost all of you know. Why is there not greater interaction between these industries, either regarding plot, character, and narrative, or in regard to production, finance, and distribution? Now, you can find two cases, but each of these industries had 800 films a year. Why should we have only two cases where somebody comes from Hong Kong and does something in Mumbai or vice versa? It's another non-event of which resonates, its silence resonates in our ears. Is it true? It is true that in the last few decades, Mumbai filmmakers do include Bangkok, Singapore, and a few other non-Indian locations in their films, partly to offset the high costs of exotic locales such as London, New York, and Paris. And sometimes there are availability problems also in Zagreb and elsewhere. There's a whole gradation of those costs, but Far East, super modern, safe, open, perfect. And indeed, they flock to those from certain parts of the Indian film industry. But is the reverse true? Do Chinese, Japanese, or other major Asian movie industries turn south towards India for exoticizing, I don't say for a nice elevated purpose, for exoticizing their own fantasies about the modern? I think not. And the question is, why not? Because it's not that there's no taste for the exotic. If you look at the whole, one of my favorite little mini topics, the global spread of K-pop, we know there are people scrutinizing the world in detail. But there are some things they don't care about. So it's a deep, for anthropologists particularly like me, that is the Blakean level where we have to live. Why here? Why not there? Why this? Why not that? At the end, we live and die on those kinds of questions and answers. Same can be said about books and translations and news on television and newsprint. Is there an Asian as opposed to Arabic or Middle Eastern or Gulf Al Jazeera that creates and produces Asian news for Asian audiences? Very difficult to find. It's somehow a unique case, and it's in Doha, which is, not Saudi Arabia. It's just a small place, a big player, but a small place. Another story I don't know the answer to. Why Doha? Why Doha is now a broker? Why it's a contact country, you might say, for many things? Who knows? Or at least I don't know. There may be literature on it, but I've yet to see in the headlines, in my favorite sources, The Economist, The Guardian, and so on, they don't seem to have a ready answer to the rise of Doha or to the prominence of Al Jazeera. So, historical connections yield the same sort of questions. I won't dwell on them now because I want to move on a bit. So, I want to end this part of my discussion by saying I see all this as having a couple of different directions. One is towards the direction of global port cities, geographies that appear to be connectors and connective, but have also emerged through the contingency of human agents choosing to do this and that, sometimes in the face of natural inducements, that they've overcome them. But I also see another direction which is of great interest to me, and I think this is true of the subject of cities, port cities, global flows, blockages, etc., which is a subject also in which both Brent and Brian and Vaijayanti, many here have written a lot, which is the question of modernities, multiple modernities, the traffic in modernities, where do they blend with each other, etc. And I was an early shareholder in that large literature, a lucky and bold investment, which often looked like it was crashing. So you have to stick with it. You have to stick with it in these things. Don't just say, oh, it's dying, leave it. So that's a lesson of my career. Is come up with an idea, and even if it's totally wrong, just hang it there. It'll come around again. So the traffic in modernities, both, and in my case, I'm more alert to Asia, India, China, to some extent, Japan. But also now we are, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, in a very volatile relationship with Burma via Assam and so on. It's a whole geography of which the Indian nation is unaware until the last 10 years. It's an edge place. It's seen as a kind of strange tribal place, who knows. Now, the whole Indian census machinery is at work to count people in Assam, Mizoram, all over the Northeast. All of a sudden, the Northeast, the edge, and this I've seen again and again in other phenomena, is the center. So the Indian census is not concerned about how do you count people in Bombay and Delhi. They're certainly doing that. But in these places, where they came from, Bangladesh, Assam, Myanmar, are they Rohingya? Are they really Rohingya? There's endless classificatory, colonial, governmentality questions, which are high stakes because they're going to affect the elections in India, where I have to remind you, only 1.4 billion people will have to decide who will rule them. So small place, but somewhat demographically heavy. So I always have to remind people, don't think, oh, it's just an Indian example. It's just an Indian example. Hello, it's a lot of people being counted, recounted. Of course, it's also a democracy. Wobbly as it is, it looks downright vigorous compared to the US. So we should pay attention. 1.4 billion people answering vaguely to the constitution, judiciary, all. In India, we're very critical. But all you have to do is look here and say, wow, India is vibrant. Downright vibrant, only 400 journalists in jail, etc. Not bad per capita, It's the perils of comparison, Brian. What can I say? It always slides slowly into something murky. But anyway, so let's make a little move to the present. And here I want to make one or two observations, again with a few examples, to say beyond the port cities, but the port cities certainly are, I think Brian used the term lens. You might see a keyhole because you see very big things from very small places into big processes. Those processes, I think, I have also written about, and I just revisit very quickly. The idea that I had about these things was that we need to connect the circulation of forms to the forms of circulation. I say it again. It's not a card trick, but I'll say it again. Just circulation of forms to the forms of circulation. So what is the circulation of forms? Anything you care to name. Divorce, constitutions, democracy, novels, or very fine things like lyric poetry, like this, like that. You can get super fine, but those are all forms, and they are moving globally. It took me a solid 30 years to realize that globalization is not like bird watching, where you're watching the thing moving, say, there, oh, there it is. No, you only see it when it's crystallized on the ground. It lands somewhere. That took me a solid 25 years, but I'm happy to sell this retail like Trump's crypto coins. You can have this. You can have this. It's an initial offering. But to say, don't look, without joking about Vijayendra, at the sky, because the sky will lead you into continuous motion with globalization and make you eventually nauseous. So you have to say, how is some mobile process, let's say building a democratic constitution, that's a plainly mobile from the US, from Europe to the US, to here, to there, and now everywhere. You have to see it in its capture on the ground. That crystallization may be 5 minutes, 10 years, 50 years, but you have to catch that moment. That is why globalization can be studied anthropologically. It took me a long time to realize that's the thing. And there was a mistake about multi-sited ethnography and all, which I'm not against. By all means, if you want to travel a lot and get very tired, but do that. But it's not going to let you catch this moving thing. The moving thing is only when somebody else pulls it down like a kite and tethers it in Tangier or Bombay, or for that matter, in the land-bound cities. So catching that flying thing, I can tell you, cost me a lot of time, a lot of bogus methodological proposals, a lot of very legitimate invitations that showed me the door and said, yeah, lovely idea that you'll be in the air catching something moving. No way to do this. And finally I saw that there was a way to do it properly, which is on the ground where mobile things get fixed. So therefore, the circulation of forms requires only one thing, to say that much of our social and cultural world is about a movement of forms. Now, that said, as somebody who has had a long history of studying objects, material culture, mics, tables, etc., I don't mean to gesture to some Platonic world where the forms are like frequent flyers, going around and then everything else on the ground. No, they are tightly connected with materiality. They always have expressions, instances, incarnations, etc., whatever the word you want to use. They never are free floating or flying. So many of these things require writing, require law, and in 2 steps you are into very material things. So these are not Platonic forms, let's say, even though that's not a nice thing to say about Plato, because even he had very specific ideas about the cave and the reflections. He was not a simple-minded man at all, but the conventional idea is, these are Platonic forms, they're very ideal, blah, blah, blah. What about the real world, the real stuff? Well, the real stuff becomes interesting because it's the infrastructure of the circulation of forms. And what I call the forms of circulation, just to capture the imagination, is really the circuits. What are the paths? And today, again, Brian, Bajenti, all brought up the fact that not all paths are made equal. This port may have a call and response from that port, but not from this one nearby. Why? So there is a set of paths, and I take these ideas from very old thinkers, Marx, William Harvey, circulation of blood, and so on, that there are paths which have some material basis, not handed down by God somewhere 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or even 5,000 years ago, but formed over time. So we have a circulatory system that forms a certain way, and we know that if you look at human anatomy and look at circulatory, it only takes a little while to see there's a whole paleo message there, which is it's not forever. So primate circulatory systems, much more birds, reptiles, they have circulatory systems too. So it's not like we are the full owners of the entire factory, but we are at a certain moment in that process. So pay attention to the circuit. So I'm saying the forms that circulate and the circuits or forms through which they circulate. I probably have, 10 minutes, maybe, something like that. So let me just end with 2 examples which all of you, especially those of you who are still awake, will immediately see their cut and paste quality. So I reveal it right away, that there's a kind of, why? Because there's some in-between bodily parts that have been carved out for reasons of time. Not much. I'll tell you, it's not like there's a chapter or a vast 500-page disquisition on something. Some small connective section, but I have 2 examples. And because already this afternoon, Vaijayanti and Brent and Brian spoke, I thought, in a wonderfully telegraphic way. So saying, look at this instance, look at that. I will do that with these 2 examples. And I'll literally do what the linguists call indexical behavior, point like that. One is jazz in relation to India. This is beautifully researched, but not by hundreds of people, like by 5 or 3.5, because 1.5 may have gone already. And the connection is to Goa, Bombay, and the African-American world all over, jazz playing world, which in the course of the 20th century had some absolutely remarkable instances that I even encountered biographically. So I had a brother who was 10 years older than I, passed away very early, but in the 50s, he and a small group of friends in Bombay were thrilled. Who was coming? Not just Satchmo, not just the great name, Jack Teagarden. How many people know the name Jack Teagarden, honestly? A few. He was a big name in American jazz, and he came to Bombay, as did many other people, and there were predecessors who played in bands. So like the banjo group, these were people who were a little more cleaned up socially, a little more respectable. And there were Goan and Catholic musicians who played with their black counterparts, who somehow connected to them. And the whole restaurant culture in Bombay, not the whole, sorry, the westernized Anglophone cosmopolitan end was infused with Black American jazz presence, either through actual visitors or through people who knew the music and played it, knew it, played the instruments, the whole range of them. So I grew up with kids who were from Goa and were almost always Catholic, all of whom played instruments, that is, Western instruments, from high school into college, into these groups. So this is a little vignette just to say that this is a case where I guarantee you could do a book, perhaps several, just New Orleans to Bombay, Goa. And it would take you into Zanzibar, into Uganda, where there were incredible groups, then Toronto, where there's a big Goan community that then went from Goa to... It's endless. It makes me dizzy, even given my incredible paucity of knowledge about this. If I knew really a lot, I would be flat. I'd be in a coma, but I know enough to know it's a great example. So I urge those of you who have the energy, enthusiasm, and interest to look into that story. The other story, which is newer to me, is, and I'm going to end with this, so Joe, you don't worry, it won't be one of these. There was a movie about Franz Liszt, starring Dirk Bogarde a long time ago, called Song Without End. I always remember this when I'm in scholarly panels and something. And so I have one more thing to say, and I think, Franz Liszt lives. Song Without End has begun. But so this is not going to be like that. So it's a quick example of something I was thrilled to discover because it's from what my teacher Barney Cohn used to call anthropology land. That is, it was from the classic canon of anthropology, and it was a phenomenon, I see Adelaine is here, that is matrilineal. So in India, we have this community called the Nayars, who are known to be, ready, matrilineal. So not somehow loosely matriarchal, etc., but matrilineal, very particular ideas in which these huge households ran through the line of women. And they had partners outside the proper caste who were their, shall we say, squeezes, though that's not a classic anthropological term, who'd come overnight, Brahmins, who'd come and spend time with, there were terms for all of this, so I won't give you a fake sense of authenticity by telling you those terms, but they would come and there was so an extensive horizontal set of relations, and then the vertical over time, women controlled Taravat. Now, here's the thing. The matrilineal business has now been subjected to two brilliant lines of inquiry which are no more than 10 years old in my knowledge. One is a new generation of scholars who work on Kerala and who work on the oceanic world and work on early modern and pre-modern history. And they have shown that from the Arab, Middle East and the Gulf world through Bombay to Southeast Asia, you have a consociation between seafaring and matrilineal. And secondly, where you would think matrilineal would be entirely opposed by the Islamic world, it is not. So right away I say, why not? The women are in power and the sailors are going all over. They are setting up matrilineal communities in Sarawak and here and there. Huge geography. So here's a very particular phenomenon, matrilineal, which in India has been already exoticized, as if it's only good for the Nayars. I have another colleague with whom I'm working, not on this subject on which I have nothing much to offer, but on a more general issue, which is the misunderstanding of these exotic cases like the Nayar, which actually cast huge light on alternative social orders in India, which are not patrilineal, which are not hypergamous, etc., but based on some wholly other thing, but they've been pushed to the corner. It's like New Orleans being pushed to the corner in relation to other great port cities. It's like, why? So there's an impact on the land geography, so to speak, and how we study it, but there is also a whole way of thinking about how social forms circulate with mercantile forms across 4 to 5 centuries in the Islamic oceanic order. So the Goa example, jazz, and this Kerala matrilineal, though they're very different, both remind me of the endless variety of ways in which histories produce geographies and physical morphologies like the port city come in and out of focus based on what those actors are doing. And then, of course, there's a host of little mice that start running around once you say these things, like typology. Is it big, small, short, long, day cities, they only emerge in the day, night port cities? I mean, obviously there are silly ways to do this, but there are real typological questions, they're very deep. But I think it helps to take a step back and think about the dynamics and how we have sometimes ourselves frozen the processes. So on that note then, I will stop. Thank you for your patience. All right, so thanks a lot.
Yeah, wherever you'd like to be, please. Yeah, great. Fantastic. So, hi, I'm back. What a wonderful, fantastic talk. I've been asked to let you all know that we have about 40 minutes to engage Professor Appadurai in conversation, and the way the organizers have elected to do this is to...
if I'm doing a Trump.
Well, there's a little clock right there, so homogeneous time can do it.
No, I'm ready for any other time. I just have to be awake,
Okay, well, if you need to be awakened...
And I'm joking. I'm fully awake now.
Well, while we transition and wake Professor Appadurai up, please, if you have questions, the organizers have asked that you write the questions on these mythical note cards that are coming around, I believe. And once you've formulated a question, hopefully in handwriting I can read, but I can read my own, so do your worst.
So
Joe,
this is the card system is actually in place.
The cards are out. Get ready. I'm going to shuffle through them and pick the top one. So please, as you've written some thoughts on these cards, signal, I imagine, Joe or Brittany or our other colleague whose name I don't know, I'm sorry, Allison, will come around and pick them up and shuttle them up here while I'll try to figure out what's happening. But while you all think of these questions, I have a few of my own, perhaps unsurprisingly. And I wanted to start by thanking you for helping me understand why I always feel so out of sorts in jazz clubs in Delhi when I feel quite well in those in Bombay. Because I found that my friends and neighbors in Delhi sit very quietly in a jazz club, which seems like it's anathema to the kind of world that the circuits we're accustomed to here. So I was amazed to think about how these kind of worlds where what is pulled down from the flow and what isn't, and where. So thank you for that really practical way of understanding something very, very confusing in my world. But I was fascinated by the way you sort of laid out the talk, beginning with history and the past and the way that pasts create place and geography, moved us into the present. And so I wanted to ask you to put another set of new things in aspic and tell us a bit more about futures, right? Because I was thinking, okay, well, what does it mean to add futures into this paradigm of creating an idea of geography? And you've talked a bit about this, and one way we might think about it is speculation, though I imagine that's probably not where you'll take it. But I wonder, how do we think about this sort of construction of space through another form of temporality, which itself is rather heterogeneous and brought to different categories by different people.
Did you have one more? These two.
I have lots, but I think
No.
we start there and see if more cards. Oh, I have.
No, that's okay.
Well, the other
two
one
are
was
quite
about,
hefty. I have to tell you.
The third one I think is perhaps somewhat still thinking about repetition and circuitry. Because one of the big themes I heard you playing with a little bit was this question of repetition and how certain forms come down or pulled down from circuits. But how do we think about the way that repetition, not as duration, but as syncopation, or maybe some other way of organizing this question of space and time?
It's a very important question. Should I try to respond to some of this, or... Yeah, I can do quickly, maybe a little indicative response rather than the tedious effort to be thorough, complete.
I think you can be whoever you want to be.
Great, hey, it's Liberation Day.
Well, for now.
For now, okay. Very deep and slightly ominous, but I'll go for it. So let me start with Delhi Bombay Jazz very quickly to say, that's a very good example because I've never had the pleasure of making the mistake of going with anybody in Delhi to listen to jazz. So, but I know what might happen because something very unusual, which is this kind of Delhi crowd actually gets silent. That's like having a fire extinguisher. It's a, everything dies. How come? Because this is not a noise-free society, whether it's somewhere in central Delhi or some outside Gurgaon nightclub or wherever it might be. Silence and a kind of quiet California wine bar atmosphere is not what I associate with Delhi at any level of class, creed, or color. So why are they, tamed? Somehow like herding cats. Why are they suddenly quiet when there's how odd? Well, I think you are onto it, that there is no built idiom, history of taste, or bodily hexes that goes with that. On the other hand, you go into anything even 1,000 miles away from Bhangra, and the whole neighborhood will be dancing. Everybody in every local marriage, etc. So Punjabi folk dance, this, that, anything vaguely Bollywood, which these days now has colonized Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, so, or they have colonized the north, whichever way you want to see it. All that works. People get into it. And of course, they also get into, classical music and more carefully aestheticized North Indian or even Carnatic music. So there's all sorts of, something for every taste, but this is a slightly dead key on the piano.
Right.
And my sense is that there's something about the set of both ingredients and historical processes that is off. Therefore, at the end, the whole thing is like, is not negative. It just doesn't. But it's a question that I'm basically deferring and saying it's well worth thinking about, because it can also be generalized to other things which really have high uptake here or there, but minimal uptake, even inside India, even inside India, especially inside India. So thank you for that. That's as far as I can go with that. But quickly, well, the future is a very big question. As you know, I have also in the last 10 or 15 years been an early investor in that game. I called out surfs up. There's a future wave coming. So I clambered onto it, crashed, but lots of other people are very skillful at that. But it's a very good question to ask. And my short answer is, I think speculation, as in Vijayanthi's collection in which I wrote a short thing, is part of it. But I also think generally what I call the ethics of possibility as against the ethics of probability, which I see as containing, confining, probabilistic, numerical, whereas possibility is horizontal, it's open, it's aspirational, etc. I think those kinds of ideas feed into the economy of the construction of horizons. In addition, I think there's a very difficult process going on in all sorts of cities, but certainly in Bombay and perhaps in many of the cities we mentioned today, which is a often violent but certainly harsh contest between images of the future. And so what I called is these are the contestation of dreams in a place like Bombay. So we have the Shiv Sena dream, get all the non-Marathi speakers out. We have some Bollywood-driven dream about this and that. We have a Kaun Banega Crorepati, every little slum kid can become a, whatever. There's a big range of dreams which are being promoted and which are being promoted at each other's expense. And of course, the Hinduite dreams of, purity, this, that, but allied with AI, tech, India stack, etc. So that is, of course, a rich ethnographic stuff. What the hell is this BJP doing with India stack and UP stack and Rajasthan stack? Everybody is stacked. It is a state and supposed to be a Hindu fundamentalist state, but they have a huge idea of how to use IT. Also for cancellation, for scandal mongering, what we all know the familiar uses, they are also learning and have been very good pupils at how to do defamation, this, that. But they're also into a very big enterprise of telling Indian youth in small towns and all that you can progress through IT, and here's how to do it, etc. So overall, if you look at India, what I would say, just as one, and this can be done in many other places that all the rest of you know about, there is a battle going on between pictures of the future. So it's not an open economy. It's not laissez-faire. It's loaded, heavy stakeholders, lots of power. But the content is not, as we often say in anthropology to each other, at a key point in the conversation when we want to close it, we say, but what about power? As you know, that's a showstopper. Usually you can't say more. But I would say the more you can say is even when power is in play, the material of it is dreams of this type, of that type, which are then pushed to get somebody else's dream off the table. So it's a power game, but not power as power. It's not just weaponry and knives and swords. It's all sorts of stuff. Hardly news to those who've been interested in, let's say, Gramsci or consent or ideology, but has to be remembered. Finally, repetition and difference. As we often say, thanks for asking this.
Well, what about power?
But I'll say this. I have a small independent business in this area, which I would like to bring to the attention, as some of our leaders say, I'd like to bring to your attention this small area. So there's a lot to be said about that. And I did touch on the fact that it's hard methodologically to know where the change is that makes a difference. See, because we can see continuity, we also see rupture. I have faced critics all my life after modernity at large who said, oh, but this is capitalism. This is modernity. This is this, this is that. I won't name them. It's hard to do it entirely neutrally. But I used to then respond by saying, yeah, but in 2010, is it enough for me to say it's capitalism? There's some few things that happened here and there in capitalism, in race, in anything you care to name. So just saying this is just that is not good. So that is the core problem with the repetition question. When do we actually see a repetition, and when do we see some, what we might call improvisation in the jazz sense, which is on a theme, a discernible theme, but is a genuine improvisation. I wouldn't know in terms of jazz, but I have some idea in terms of our material, where is some real twist. But I did do, this is my little small industry or small shop, which I want to advertise briefly in this context. May get some late customers, you know. There's still a little supply left. No, I had a lifelong obsession, this is serious, with something in my mind unique to Indian cinema. Popular cinema, particularly Hindi cinema. Now all of it is liquefied because there's national, regional cinemas galore, this, that, but in the heyday of what we call Bollywood, there was a phenomenon that no one has shown me is not unique to India, which is repeat viewing. People would tell you, oh, that film, I saw it 80 times. 80 times? Oh, I saw it 15 times. Now, the empirical truth I later realized, again after years of struggle, is not a point, is that is an index of appreciation. So every cab driver I met there, have you seen that Devanand film? My neighbor saw it 42 times, etc., etc. It was later clear to me that this repeat viewing is an important metric of what are called hit films. So if you go to the category hit film, what's a hit film, which is also something Hollywood is interested in India, very often it is people buy tickets to the same thing over a year. So it's like every other film that has this quality is like Rocky Horror. But it's not a cult film. It's a straight industry film. Everybody has the formula. It's like making, you know, cinnamon buns. Everybody knows. But every now and then a hit cinnamon bun. Why? So if you find the answer to this, which I could not, although I tried strenuously for about 20, 25 years, and finally at some point I said, you know, you're going to be gone soon. Put out what you have. And I did. And it's a paper on repetition and difference in Hindi film viewing.
Okay.
And of course, I had an idea that it had something to do with lyrics, something to do with rhythm, something that Vijayant is also very aware of and interested in, and that the songs had a percussive function, but that the story had a narrative or continued function. Anyway, I made up all sorts of things. Very persuasively, I thought. But then at the end, because I'm an India scholar, Hindi films, I had to dress it up in some thrillers.
Of course.
So repetition and difference had to be brought in. And I think I did an effective job because nobody in the Deleuzian world, although very few know about Hindi cinema or care, but those few Deleuzians who care did not show me up and say, what nonsense, the guy clearly he's got the wrong Deleuze. Is it Gilles, etc., etc. Anyway, so I draw this to your attention because I do think it opens a conversation about syncopation in social life. I mean, people like Bourdieu were onto this, but I think they were limited by what they had at their disposal. So that's my thought on the third. Anyway, I've gone on far too long. Audience is already rightly restless, so I'll try and be briefer with anything that's it. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, shall we? Let's see what we've got. Oh, there's another set over here. Okay. Oh, well, I'll follow up while I'm reading this. I think I just taught politics of the government right before coming here, and I was thinking about the way you were sort of talking about the occupation of forms.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if, as I read through these cards, you might just
say something
share a bit
on
about
Professor Chatterjee's book,
or just in your own work on the way the sort of occupation of form as a way of life or a crafting of imaginary or dream or.
Well, I think the main thing that I was trying to bring to the table is the idea that even if we are very interested in material things, there's something they are infused with. We could use another word instead of form, etc., but it seems a reasonable word. Something which has an outline, a shape, all these words are overlapping with form, and which is not entirely weighed down by its quiddity. It's a chair, it's not that. If you go too far in that direction, the thing gets restricted. So I'm thinking we have to loosen it up a bit so there's some, so I'll leave it there. I don't have a much deeper thought. You may have, having read Partho, have some other idea about form and occupation, thinking of housing, houses. He, of course, is even more interested in higher level questions, shall we say, of the state,
Sure.
civil society, a little bit more business class, We are still in economy.
Well, for sure. I'm in the back row. But I guess I was thinking about how people go to see Amitabh Bachchan in a film where he's acting as someone else and then going. So you go to see Amitabh Bachchan because he was in Sholay, and you care that he's Amitabh Bachchan because he was in Sholay, but you're willing to see him as not Amitabh Bachchan in the next film. That's what I was thinking about in this.
It's a great thought, and I don't think my dear Partho will be great help in this regard, partly because of his level. So at my level, I do have something to say on that, which is that these, the viewer experience, and somebody brought up today viewing, Brian, was it you, about viewing, viewers, maybe all of it. I have long said and written here and there in places that are not read every day or remembered much, something to do with the fact that people in Bombay, where I was interested in public culture, flows, etc., always have a script when they go to something. So when they go to a cricket match, they have the movie in mind. They go to the movie, they have the match in mind, or the museum in mind, or the temple in mind. So there's a constant. At that time, again, I went down some rabbit holes, intertextual something or other, and then intercontextual. That's at the point at which I had to get the oxygen out. Intercontextual is beyond. But I knew that it's not just the text, it's the context, it's the stadium, it's the restaurant, it's this and that, but all of them are enframing, as it were, each other on a real-time basis. Now, how do you catch this? How do you ethnographize it? So you can intuit that, say, in Amitabh type career, there are two dynamics. One is over time and, let's say, vertical, running through all his performances. The other is horizontal. He's like somebody else. He's like a dacoit. He's like a criminal. He's like a politician. That's horizontal. Right. But then there's also Amitabh, slight variations, So that's as far as I could go. But I think it's a rich topic for how these popular forms, you might say, remain extremely alive and very hospitable to context, to changes, to inflections. But it's a tough business. I mean, I still am very interested in it, but let's say method point of view, it's difficult, really difficult.
Really tricky. Well, let's see what the cards hold for our future. So this one is a really interesting question that I think you can dig your teeth into. So I see some of the relations you describe of port cities as relevant to touristic cities. Can you comment, are tourist cities the new port cities? So how do we think about this circulation of people as commodity?
Well, it's obviously it's a big question in a good sense, namely that it's a field almost now. As you know, tourist studies, there are journals, it's elaborate, and I don't follow all of it, but I know people who have contributed to it, helped to shape it, and I would say, first of all, the locale which we're trying to capture, namely the port city, clearly overlaps with the locale we might call tourist places or spaces. Then I was recently in Doha. Even they have something of a port going, though you don't think of Doha as a vast oceanic place. But there is some element of that, and there is some claim to that sort of thing, and to the Gulf as a very nearby part of their experience, etc. So there is an interaction, and it's building itself massively as a tourism place. So that's why I say that it's hard even to keep all those apart, especially in the Gulf, but in plenty of places. I think Vajanti is pointing this out, the whole Eastern Harbor, and now you see it, now you don't, and suddenly you see it, it has become some part of London docks, built up into some kind of visitorial, extravaganza. So this is going on in many places, but on tourism, I think the flip of tourism is proletarian migration. So the body is going that way, and the body is coming in this modality. I think that intersection really needs to be looked at, because even now, in Greece and so on, those things are actively interacting.
Certainly.
Where people just go from England to drink beer and sit in the beaches and do whatever is always done, and our people in Germany from other places, they are tourists, right? And people like a wonderful Swedish historian, Orvar Lofgren, wrote about the whole Mediterranean as a place of the detritus, let's say, of travel tourism. He didn't separate these things. It's a beautiful book. I wish I could remember Orvar's book, but he was a pioneer in looking at the Mediterranean as this kind of place, both of leisure and memory. And he had a Brodelian sense of its long history, but he knew there are new things going on. So I think of things like this. They remind me that some of these places are very hot zones where poorer migrant bodies, at-risk bodies, drownable, searchable, jailable, interviewable, interrogable, are, very near the movement zones of tourists. So, and the third piece of this is something else which I'm also interested in, but which is repatriation of objects, and African objects in Europe. And I've written something to say, that the migrant discussion, the object discussion are right like this, and that they need to be, brought closer in some way. To this, I would add tourism. It's kind of leisure, but it's also heavily classed and raced. Where do people go? Who can afford the very expensive, cruises and things? Who goes on these cheaper packages? That's all highly graded. And somewhere these flows intersect. And then there's the object business as well, that, the demand, which raises all sorts of issues about sovereignty. The trade happened before there were nation states, but now the nation state is saying, give us back ours. Well, who's we, Who knows? Anyway.
And certainly another circuit, a set of circuits that don't
Not
always...
a circuit, it's yeah, that's a good point, because circuit also has a problem with these words.
Right.
Like edge has some problems. It has the word closed comes to mind too quickly. It's like it finishes, but it has to be more open. And so I'm totally not attached to the word, but something to the path.
Yeah.
Which I used in social life of things, paths and diversions. I thought it's time for a new word. Let's try circuit. Turns out to be a very old word.
Well, paths is a great way to think about it too.
It is.
So our next question is, how do port cities help us think about the future of the human in an era where flows are increasingly driven by material and digital processes. So how do
Yeah,
we-
that's a good point. Yeah, a very good question, a very deep question, because it touches on two poles, the highly abstracted digital and the very thing-like stuff that's also gone, material things, including bodies. So trafficking, for example, has a vigorous ongoing life, and nobody who's either been an observer or a victim of human trafficking across port cities will be much interested in discussions of parahuman, etc. They are doing well with the current experience they've had of other humans. So this is another reason why I think one of our speakers this afternoon said, like, let's not leap off suddenly as if everything has become, is floating. There's a lot of human on human violence. So I'm thinking that what port cities do, I'm just thinking aloud now, is possibly they offer a new lens, keyhole, aperture, to see some dynamics of the tension between highly abstracted things and things which are highly measurable. So I know, for example, that in the literature on trafficking, there is a significant subset of players who are into crypto, because they want to disguise everything. They want to disguise the commodity, the traffic, and the end asset, which is being hoarded. Hardly surprising, but it brings everything together. So from the point of view of the people who are being trafficked, they don't care, meaning they're getting whatever intermediate form they want of cash or money or this or that. But at the end, there's some stockpiling going on, which is where our, most revolting leaders and market managers are engaged, which is highly abstract. I don't fully understand what that economy is. There's a lot of internal division about it. Is it real? Is it transient? Is it this? Is that? But people are doing it. They're engaged. So something like that would be my direction, is maybe port cities let one observe some of the points of translation, shall we say, that go on between these registers, or currencies, so to speak.
I think that begs a question then of secrecy, right? How do we think about port cities as a place where regimes of value are transforming the visible and the invisible, the sort
Very
of
good,
commodity?
important question, and partly it was there in Vaijayanti's talk, which is the in plain sight aspect. I grew up in Bombay too. You could have pushed me over when you told me there's actually a whole harbor on that other side, because I was on this side. Lovely views, Marine Drive, the promenade. I thought I was in Beirut, before the violence, leading a happy life. And on the other side were these walls where at every key point, as Vaijayanti said, there were naval and army officers checking your ID. And if you're not from the armed forces or working for a ship or something, go home, please. In that hole, and I didn't look, I just saw some big gate, some guy in a naval uniform, and I moved on to wherever I was going. But it was there, but some of that was built in, so to speak. It was secrecy at an organized level. And then there's a lot of this kind of illicit stuff, which I think has been done brilliantly looked at in places like sub-Saharan Africa, Caroline Nordstrom and so on. Things are just moving across huge distances. Refrigerators are turning up here and there, Toyotas. I mean, the most mobile thing in the world. They're not small. But something is happening which is not visible to everybody.
Right.
So I would say the question becomes, where do port cities fit in this economy of this cocktail of visible and invisible? Because the visible part is a little bit like Sherlock Holmes and the Pearl White Letter. It's right in front of you, and so you're looking everywhere else, but it's actually right in front of you. But other parts are genuinely clandestine,
right.
And again, port cities may be a great way to look for the dynamics, as it were, in particular instances, commodity, markets.
Well, we have about 10 more minutes, and I have a really good last question. So if are there any more cards, or should I ask this ideal?
I think
final
coma
question?
is setting in, but
Yes, let's
not for me, but
let's ask it. All right. So what research do you still hope to investigate? Says our purple-penned friend. And anything that would surprise us?
Well, yes, there is something which is really like the purple letter, because there's nothing new about it at all. It is a subject so hoary, that is H-O-A-R-Y, I clarify this in these terms. It's so old, so all-encompassing for people who work on India or South Asia. It begins, this is like the New York Times puzzle, with C, and it's 5 letters. Any guesses?
No, it doesn't end in an S, does it?
It ends with E. 5 letters, starts with C.
Oh, that one.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go, buddy.
All right, anybody want to guess?
Cast, or cast, as the case may be, but C-A-S-T-E, which is the very liquid in which we are all brined as South Asianists for the last 75 years minimum. So we have to struggle to put our nose out of that brine and to look at anything else. And I was one of the early rebellious people who said, look, it's not everything, let's study temples, let's look at cinema, let's look at politics. It's not all caste. Well, now I've come back to saying, well, it is kind of all caste. So the new project is disgustingly old, but again, I have some, which my partners and directors have not emboldened me to reveal, some small twist, which I hope would not be yet one more boring study of purity and pollution, up and down, left and right. You know the variations. It's like a Chinese calisthenic program. It's like, it's all set. But no, I have a small new, what we call in Silicon Valley, a small innovation in how the chip is produced, which I have a co-author to, who I'm not empowered to share the name of, who is not very young, that is the only clue I can give. But who is very good and also has a sense that there's something new to say. And the clue I'll give you is that the census, which I may have mentioned, the huge Indian census, turns crucially on a new way to governmentalize caste at a local level, which then both produces new effects and then counts them. And that will affect the whole electorate, so it's a huge thing. So there is some potential, as we call it, what is the impact? I can answer the question, what is the impact? But what's the product that is still under some design? It's slightly secret.
Well, we look
no,
forward.
I'm joking.
We look forward.
It is a new project, I just point to it. Yeah.
Well, I think it speaks to this comment you made about if you stick with an idea long enough, it'll come back around. When did you publish the left-handed and right-handed? That's
1974.
74.
My first published article, correct.
Right. So back to revise that
I was
work.
3 at the time. The standards were very lax, not like when you were.
Well, I'm excited to see that work and what it will have to share with us who think about this big scary word. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and for joining us. And
thank you all for your patience, science, and marvelous questions.